Now at 10, an arrest in connection to that shooting between motorcycle gangs at a gas station. This all happened as thousands of people are in Volusia County to celebrate Bike Week.
They roared into Britain on thundering Harleys, leather-clad warriors fighting for control of the streets. The Hells Angels and Outlaws MC, two legendary biker gangs locked in a deadly rivalry that would explode in shocking violence. What started as territorial disputes soon escalated into ambushes, shootings, and murder. Behind their iconic patches lies a hidden world of loyalty, revenge, and bloodshed that rocked the UK to its core. The untold story of Britain's most dangerous biker war.
In August last year, Gerry Tobin spent a weekend at the Bulldog Bash, an annual event in Warwickshire organised by the Hells Angels. He was heading home at the front of a 3-vehicle convoy, in keeping with his status as a senior or fully patched Hells Angel. The biker was followed onto the M40. As he reached speeds of between 80 and 90 miles per hour, a car drew up close and 2 shots were fired. Mr. Tobin was killed instantly. Today, 2 men from a rival biker group, the Outlaws, were found guilty of his murder.
Murder of Gerry Tobin. The summer of 2007 turned deadly on a stretch of British highway when Gerry Tobin, a 35-year-old mechanic and devoted Hells Angel, was riding home from the Bulldog Bash Festival. As his Harley thundered down the M40 motorway in Warwickshire, a car pulled alongside him. Without warning, shots rang out. A single bullet struck Tobin in the back of his head, killing him instantly. His bike veered off the road as his fellow riders watched in horror. The attack wasn't random. It was a calculated hit by members of the Outlaws MC, who had been tracking Hells Angels members leaving the festival. Police later discovered the killers had set up a shooting range on private property to practice their aim. They'd planned everything meticulously, except their getaway. The burned-out car they used was quickly linked back to them. The afternoon sun beat down on the M40 motorway as Gerry Tobin's Harley-Davidson thundered along the asphalt. It was August 12, 2007, and the 35-year-old mechanic was heading home from the Bulldog Bash, one of Britain's biggest biker festivals. With his trademark bandana and leather vest bearing the infamous Death's Head patch of the Hells Angels, Tobin was easy to spot, exactly as his killers intended. Unknown to Tobin, members of the rival Outlaws motorcycle club had been watching festival exits, hunting for a full-patch Hells Angel. They'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, even setting up a makeshift shooting range on private property to practice their aim. As Tobin cruised at around 90 miles per hour, a green Rover 620 pulled alongside him. The passenger window lowered and shots rang out across the highway. A single bullet struck Tobin in the back of his head, killing him instantly. His motorcycle veered off the road as his girlfriend, following in a car behind, watched in horror. The Rover sped away, leaving Tobin's body on the roadside and dozens of shocked motorists calling emergency services. Britain had just witnessed its first motorcycle club assassination on the open highway, a style of killing more common in America than the UK. This wasn't a random act of violence or road rage. Police quickly determined that Tobin had been targeted specifically because of the patch on his back. The location was no accident either. The Bulldog Bash took place in Warwickshire, an area the Outlaws considered their territory. The festival, organised by the Hells Angels, had been a source of tension for years. By killing Tobin on a public highway in broad daylight, the Outlaws weren't just murdering one man, they were sending a message that they controlled these roads. The public nature of the killing shocked the nation. Motorcycle clubs had always had a rough reputation, but executing someone on one of Britain's busiest highways showed a level of brazenness that crossed a line. The murder made front-page news across the country, with headlines warning of American-style biker wars coming to British shores. Warwickshire police launched Operation Polar, one of the largest investigations in the force's history. Within days, they found the burned-out Rover used in the shooting, and within weeks, they began making arrests. 7 members of the Outlaws were eventually taken into custody, their phones and movements placing them at the scene. The trial revealed the chilling detail that went into the murder. The shooters had practiced for weeks. They had conducted surveillance of the festival site. They had chosen their ambush point carefully for maximum effectiveness and easy escape. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a coldly calculated hit, ordered by the leadership of the South Warwickshire chapter of the Outlaws. In 2008, all 7 men were convicted of Tobin's murder and received life sentences with minimum terms between 25 and 30 years. The judge made it clear this wasn't just punishment for killing one man, but for bringing extreme gang violence to public highways where innocent people could have been hurt or killed.
They were Simon Turner, who claimed he was at a workshop in Coventry at the time of the killing, and Dane Garside, who had admitted driving the car from which the shots were fired. Another man, Sean Crichton, pleaded guilty to murder before the trial began. The jury is still considering its verdicts on 4 other men, who all deny any involvement in what the prosecution called a military-style execution. The judge has now given the jury the option of majority verdicts, where at least 10 of them have to agree.
Gerry Tobin's murder marked a turning point for British biker culture. What had once been seen as a subculture of rebellious but ultimately harmless motorcycle enthusiasts was now revealed as something far darker: organised crime groups willing to kill in broad daylight on busy public roads. 7 Outlaws members were eventually arrested for what the media called an execution on the motorway. The murder shocked the public, not just for its brazenness, but because it happened in broad daylight on one of Britain's busiest roads. It wasn't some back-alley biker brawl. This was an assassination carried out with military precision, bringing America's notorious biker wars to British soil. The killing of Gerry Tobin marked a turning point. What had been a simmering rivalry suddenly became a full-blown war, with the Outlaws making a bold statement about their growing presence across mass incarcerations.
With cuffs in hand, a judge officially charged the president of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, John Petrarca, with felony arson charges. That's after 2 separate fires in the middle of the night at a detached home garage off Tunk Hill Road.
Mass incarcerations. The murder of Gerry Tobin triggered one of the largest crackdowns on outlaw motorcycle gangs in British history. Operation Ran, the police investigation into the killing, wasn't just about catching Tobin's murderers. It became a full-scale assault on biker gang infrastructure. When the dust settled, all 7 Outlaws members involved in the hit were behind bars, facing minimum sentences of 25 to 30 years each. But the police didn't stop there. Armed with new intelligence from wiretaps, informants, and surveillance, they swept through clubhouses across the country. Dozens of members from both clubs found themselves in handcuffs, charged with everything from drug trafficking to illegal weapons possession. The cells filled quickly. What many bikers didn't realize was that British authorities were watching them long before Tobin's murder. Police had built detailed files on key members, mapping out networks and criminal enterprises. When they finally moved, they didn't just arrest individuals, they dismantled entire chapter leadership structures. The deadly shooting of Gerry Tobin on the M40 motorway wasn't just a murder, it was the trigger for the largest crackdown on outlaw motorcycle clubs in British history. What followed was a wave of arrests, trials, and lengthy prison sentences that emptied clubhouses across the country and put an entire generation of biker leadership behind bars. Operation Harvest was the code name for the nationwide response to the escalating biker war. Police forces from every corner of Britain joined forces, sharing intelligence and coordinating raids with military precision. Dawn raids became a regular occurrence, with armed officers smashing through the reinforced doors of clubhouses and members' homes. The message was clear. The days of bikers operating with impunity were over. The 7 Outlaws members directly involved in Tobin's murder were just the beginning. As police dug deeper, they uncovered evidence of widespread criminal networks. Phones seized during the initial arrests provided contact lists that led to more suspects. Informants, sensing which way the wind was blowing, came forward with information in exchange for reduced sentences or protection. Each arrest led to more intelligence, creating a domino effect that toppled biker operations across the country. Unlike previous crackdowns that had focused on street-level crimes, this operation targeted the organizations themselves. Prosecutors used new laws designed for fighting organized crime, allowing them to charge club officers for crimes committed by their members. Chapter presidents who had carefully kept their hands clean for years suddenly found themselves facing decades in prison for directing criminal enterprises. The numbers were staggering. In the 3 years following Tobin's murder, over 200 full-patch members of various clubs were sent to prison, with sentences averaging 12 years. Entire chapters of both the Outlaws and Hells Angels effectively ceased to exist, with every patch-wearing member either behind bars or in hiding. Clubhouses that had stood as symbols of biker power for decades were seized under proceeds of crime laws, their contents auctioned off, and buildings sold or converted to other uses.
Said initially this morning that we had arrested 192. I am correcting that number. It is a little bit lower. At last count, we have 170 individuals that we have arrested and are booking or have been booked into the McLennan County Jail. Those individuals are being charged with engaging in organized crime in reference to the shooting at Twin Peaks.
The mass incarcerations created a power vacuum in the biker world. With experienced leaders locked away, younger, often more volatile members stepped up to fill their positions. Many lacked the restraint and strategic thinking of their predecessors, leading to impulsive actions that further exposed their operations to law enforcement. Some chapters descended into internal power struggles, further weakening clubs already reeling from the loss of their core membership. Prison life brought its own challenges for the bikers. Behind bars, the fearsome reputation that protected them on the streets meant little. They faced enemies from rival clubs, gang members with grudges, and prison populations who didn't follow the biker code of honor. Many were forced to request protective custody, a humiliating step for men who had built their identity on toughness and self-reliance. The mass incarcerations transformed Britain's biker landscape almost overnight. Clubs that had dominated territories for decades suddenly disappeared from the streets. The rumbling processions of Harleys that had once announced their presence became rare sights. In their place came a new generation of bikers, more careful, more hidden, and all too aware of the heavy price their predecessors had paid for their visibility. The mass incarcerations created power vacuums in both organizations. Suddenly, experienced leaders were gone, replaced by younger, often more volatile members. The old guard who understood the unwritten rules of the biker world were now writing letters from prison cells instead of calling the shots on the streets. These empty slots in the hierarchy led to chaotic power struggles within the clubs themselves, even as they faced increased scrutiny from authorities who were now treating them not just as troublesome bikers, but as organized crime groups deserving of Maurice Mom Boucher.
It's a time that, looking back, is almost hard to believe. This was Maurice Mom Boucher at a court appearance for his son. Boucher was the head of an elite chapter of the Hells Angels. Everyone knew Mom Boucher was a killer, and he knew everyone knew. He seemed to love it. Quebec's biker war raged for 8 years. More than 160 people were killed, and it made the man at the middle of it infamous.
Maurice Mom Boucher. Maurice Mom Boucher cast a long shadow over the biker world without ever setting foot in Britain. From his base in Montreal, Canada, this legendary Hells Angels president rewrote the rulebook for outlaw motorcycle clubs worldwide, turning traditional biker gangs into sophisticated criminal empires. Standing just under 6 feet tall with piercing eyes and a permanent scowl, Boucher didn't look like someone who'd earned the nickname Mom. The name came from Maurice, but it took on new meaning as he became a father figure to countless bikers who followed his vision. Despite his unassuming appearance, those who crossed him rarely lived to regret it. Boucher's rise to power began in the rough streets of Montreal in the 1980s. After a stint in prison for sexual assault, he joined the Hells Angels at a critical time when Canadian biker gangs were battling for control of the lucrative drug trade. While others relied on brute force alone, Boucher brought strategic thinking to the conflict. He organized the Angels into a military-style operation with clear chains of command, dedicated roles, and unprecedented discipline. Under his leadership, the Quebec biker war erupted, a bloody conflict that claimed over 160 lives between 1994 and 2002. Boucher didn't just target rival gang members, he ordered hits on their families, friends, and anyone who supported them. The violence reached shocking levels when his men began bombing public establishments connected to rival gangs, killing innocent bystanders in the process. What set Boucher apart from other biker leaders was his business mind. He created a multi-layered organization where full-patch members rarely got their hands dirty. Instead, he established puppet clubs of younger bikers who handled dangerous street-level tasks while the main chapter reaped the profits. He opened legitimate businesses, restaurants, construction companies, tattoo parlors that laundered drug money while providing jobs for loyal members. Perhaps his most lasting innovation was the creation of the Nomads chapter, an elite force within the Hells Angels that answered directly to him. These were his most trusted men, freed from the territorial restrictions of normal chapters and able to move wherever they were needed to enforce his will or expand club territory. Boucher's downfall came in 2002 when he was sentenced to life in prison for ordering the murders of 2 prison guards. A brazen attack meant to show that even behind bars, no one was beyond his reach. Yet even from his cell, his influence continued. The organizational structure he created spread to Hells Angels chapters across Europe, Australia, and throughout North America. The summer sun beat down on the M40 motorway as Gerry Tobin rode his Harley-Davidson home from the Bulldog Bash, one of Britain's biggest biker festivals. It was August 12, 2007, and the 35-year-old mechanic was in high spirits after spending the weekend with his Hells Angels brothers. With his girlfriend following in a car behind, Tobin had no idea he was riding into an ambush that would send shockwaves through Britain's biker world. As his motorcycle thundered along the highway in Warwickshire at around 2 p.m., a Green Rover 620 pulled alongside him. In an instant, shots rang out. A single bullet struck Tobin in the back of his head, killing him instantly. His beloved Harley veered off the road as his girlfriend watched in horror, powerless to help as her partner's life ended in seconds on the asphalt. This wasn't a random act of violence or road rage. Police quickly determined that Tobin had been targeted specifically because of the patch on his back, the infamous Death's Head logo of the Hells Angels. The shooters were members of the rival Outlaws MC, who had carefully planned the assassination for maximum impact. For weeks before the murder, Outlaws members had been watching the routes bikers took to and from the Bulldog Bash Festival, which was held at the Longmarston Airfield near Stratford-upon-Avon. They set up a shooting range on private property to practice their aim. They chose their spot on the motorway carefully, a stretch with good visibility and easy escape routes. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a coldly calculated hit. The brutality and public nature of the killing shocked even hardened police officers. Executing a man in broad daylight on one of Britain's busiest highways showed a level of brazenness rarely seen in UK crime. It wasn't just the murder of one man. It was a declaration of war, a message to the Hells Angels that nowhere was safe, not even on the open road that bikers consider sacred territory. The police response was swift and massive. Operation Polar, as it was called, became one of the largest investigations in Warwickshire police history. Within weeks, they tracked down the burned-out Rover used in the shooting and began piecing together the conspiracy that led to Tobin's death. 7 members of the Outlaws were eventually arrested. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Cell phone records placing them at the scene, forensic evidence linking them to the murder weapons, and perhaps most damning testimony from one of their own who broke the biker code of silence. In 2008, all 7 men were convicted of Tobin's murder. The sentences were harsh, life imprisonment with minimum terms between 25 and 30 years. The judge made it clear this wasn't just punishment for killing one man, but for the breathtaking disregard for public safety their actions showed. Gerry Tobin's murder marked a turning point in Britain's biker culture. What had been a simmering rivalry erupted into open warfare, bringing American-style biker violence to British soil in a way that couldn't be ignored. His death stripped away the romantic image of outlaw bikers, revealing the darker reality of organized crime that lurked beneath the surface of motorcycle club culture.
Well, he won the first round. The jury in Boucher's original trial found him not guilty. The laughing wouldn't last. A second trial was ordered on appeal. One of the reasons, jurors had been intimidated. Boucher was found guilty the second time around. He would spend the rest of his days in prison, but still plugged into organized crime. In fact, still ordering murders. In 2018, he had another 10 years tacked on to a life sentence. Now, the reason Boucher became what some have called a folk hero in Quebec is because most of the victims of the biker war were criminals, but not all. For journalists who covered those years, there are names of innocent victims that are impossible to forget. The prison guards who were killed, Diane Lavigne and Pierre Rondeau, Daniel Desrochers, the 11-year-old boy playing in a park, killed when a Jeep nearby was blown up. And Yves Albert, the father of two, gunned down gassing up his car. He was shot 9 times because he was mistaken for a biker. If, for a time, Boucher lived a life that seemed to be above the law, it didn't last. He spent his final 2 decades locked up. What did last is the pain he caused.
Though locked away until his death from throat cancer in 2022, Mom Boucher's legacy lives on in outlaw motorcycle clubs worldwide. His blueprint for transforming bikers from rebellious road warriors into organized crime powerhouses forever changed the face of motorcycle club culture and created a model that law enforcement agencies are still struggling to combat today. The days of proudly and openly displaying club patches began to fade as the legal noose tightened and the essence of what it meant to be Outlaws UK chapters. Outlaws UK chapters. The Outlaws MC planted their flag in British soil years after the Hells Angels had already established themselves as the dominant biker force. Starting with just a handful of chapters in the Midlands region, the Outlaws expanded rapidly through the 1990s and 2000s. Their recruitment strategy was simple but effective: target existing local motorcycle clubs and convince them to patch over to become Outlaws chapters. Each new chapter meant more territory, more manpower, and more influence. Soon, the distinctive skull and crossed pistons patch of the Outlaws was appearing in cities across England: Birmingham, Leicester, London, and beyond. They weren't just hanging out in clubhouses either. The Outlaws ran bars, organized events, and built a network that rivaled the Hells Angels' long-established presence. What made the UK chapters unique was their fierce independence. While they paid respect to the American mother chapter, British Outlaws developed their own identity, adapting American biker culture to British streets. They claimed territories around motorway corridors, creating invisible boundaries that other clubs crossed at their peril. The distinctive skull and crossed pistons patch of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club first appeared on British roads in the late 1980s, years after their bitter rivals, the Hells Angels, had already established a foothold. What began as a small presence in the Midlands would grow into one of the country's most powerful biker organisations, with chapters stretching from Scotland to the south coast. Unlike the Hells Angels, who expanded through carefully controlled official charters, the Outlaws built their UK presence through a strategy of absorbing existing motorcycle clubs. They would approach established local clubs with strong membership but limited power, offering them the protection and prestige of the international Outlaws name. This patch-over process instantly transformed small independent groups into cells of a worldwide organisation. The first major Outlaws stronghold emerged in the West Midlands, centred around Birmingham and Coventry. These industrial cities, with their working-class traditions and strong motorcycle culture, proved fertile ground for recruitment. The Outlaws deliberately established their power base in regions where the Hells Angels' presence was weak, creating territories they could defend more easily. Each Outlaws chapter follows a military-style structure with elected officers. The president runs the chapter, supported by a vice president, sergeant-at-arms, enforcer, secretary, and treasurer. This leadership team makes day-to-day decisions, though major moves require votes from all full members. Prospective members might spend years proving themselves before receiving the coveted full patch. The clubhouses themselves vary from converted industrial buildings to ordinary-looking houses in residential areas. From the outside, many appear unremarkable, identified only by discreet security cameras and the occasional row of motorcycles parked outside. Inside, they transform into private worlds where normal society's rules don't apply. Most feature bars, meeting areas, and heavily secured rooms where club business happens, away from prying eyes. Becoming a recognized chapter isn't easy. Groups must first prove themselves as support clubs, wearing patches that show allegiance to the Outlaws without full membership rights. Only after demonstrating loyalty, recruiting strength, and often generating income for the larger organization will they be granted full chapter status and the right to wear the official Outlaws patch. By the early 2000s, the UK Outlaws had grown powerful enough to directly challenge HELLS Angels territories. They established chapters near traditional Angels strongholds in London, Essex, and Kent, creating a powder keg of tension that would eventually explode into violence. The strategic placement of these chapters wasn't accidental. They deliberately encroached on lucrative drug trafficking routes and entertainment venues controlled by their rivals. The chapter system creates a network that's remarkably resilient against law enforcement efforts. When police target one chapter, members from others provide support, money, and manpower to keep operations running. This built-in redundancy means taking down individual chapters rarely impacts the organization as a whole. Today, the UK Outlaws continue to expand, with new chapters emerging in previously untapped areas. Each new patch on the map represents not just a group of motorcycle enthusiasts, but another outpost in a sophisticated criminal network that has successfully transplanted American biker culture into British soil, often with bloody consequences. The Warwickshire chapter became particularly notorious, establishing their power base dangerously close to areas the HELLS Angels considered their turf. This expansion didn't happen by accident. It was a deliberate strategy to challenge the HELLS Angels' dominance, pushing boundaries until something had to break. Their growing presence and bold territorial claims led directly to increasing tensions and, eventually, mass arrests that would decimate their ranks. Now talk about Walter Stadnik. Walter Stadnik didn't look like your typical biker boss. Standing just 5 feet 5 inches with a slight build, he earned the nickname Nugget, short for nugget, but what he lacked in size, he made up for in ruthless ambition. As the first Canadian national president of the HELLS Angels, Stadnik transformed scattered biker gangs across Canada into a unified criminal empire that stretched from coast to coast. Born in Hamilton, Ontario, Stadnik's journey into the biker world began with local clubs before he patched over to the HELLS Angels in the early 1980s. Unlike the flashy gangsters who flaunted their wealth, Stadnik lived modestly, driving ordinary cars and living in middle-class neighborhoods. This low-key approach kept him off police radar while he quietly built his power base. Walter Stadnik doesn't fit the Hollywood image of a feared biker boss. Standing just 5 feet 5 inches with a slight build that earned him the nickname Nugget, short for nugget, he looks more like an ordinary guy you'd pass on the street without a second glance. Yet this unassuming figure transformed the HELLS Angels from scattered clubs into Canada's most powerful criminal organization, with influence reaching across oceans to shape biker gangs in Britain and beyond. Born in Hamilton, Ontario, Stadnik's journey into biker royalty began in the 1970s with local motorcycle clubs before he patched over to the HELLS Angels. Unlike the flashy gangsters who flaunt their wealth, Stadnik lived remarkably modestly. He drove regular cars instead of flashy vehicles, lived in middle-class neighborhoods, and avoided the spotlight. This low-key approach kept him off police radar while he quietly built his power base across the country. What made Stadnik dangerous wasn't physical intimidation, but his business mind. He saw beyond traditional biker activities like bar fights and wild parties. recognizing untapped potential in organized drug trafficking, loan sharking, and extortion. Under his leadership, the Hells Angels established sophisticated networks that generated millions while keeping most members at arm's length from the actual drugs. This structure made prosecution nearly impossible, as the real bosses were several layers removed from street-level crimes. Stadnik's greatest achievement was orchestrating the massive expansion of the Hells Angels across Canada during the 1990s. He approached rival clubs with a simple choice: join us or be destroyed. Many chose to patch over, surrendering their club colors to become Hells Angels chapters. Those who refused faced bombings, shootouts, and assassinations in what became known as the Quebec Biker War, a conflict that claimed over 160 lives between 1994 and 2002. Despite the bloodshed happening under his watch, Stadnik maintained a remarkable ability to avoid direct links to violence. While his soldiers carried out murders and bombings, he remained insulated, using careful communication methods and tight-knit circles of trusted associates. This approach kept him free, while many other leaders faced prison time. His influence extended far beyond Canada. Stadnik established connections with Hells Angels chapters in Europe and particularly the UK, where British bikers studied his organizational methods. His blueprint for expansion, combining strategic violence with business thinking, became the template for how modern motorcycle clubs grow their territory and influence around the world. Stadnik's downfall finally came in 2004 when he was sentenced to 20 years for drug trafficking. Yet even behind bars, his legacy continued as the criminal empire he built flourished under new leadership. The sophisticated structure he created proved almost impossible to dismantle, with new members stepping up whenever police removed key figures. Today, the organizational model that Stadnik perfected continues to frustrate law enforcement worldwide. His greatest achievement wasn't just building a criminal empire, it was creating a self-sustaining system that could survive without him, ensuring the Hells Angels would remain powerful long after his name faded from headlines. What made Stadnik particularly dangerous was his business mind. He saw beyond the traditional biker activities of bar fights and bike runs, recognizing the untapped potential in organized drug trafficking, loan sharking, and extortion. Under his leadership, the Hells Angels established sophisticated distribution networks that generated millions while keeping most members at arm's length from the actual drugs. Stadnik's greatest achievement was the strategic expansion of the Hells Angels across Canada during the 1990s. He approached rival clubs with a simple choice: join us or be destroyed. Many chose to patch over, surrendering their club colors for the Death's Head logo. Those who refused faced bombings, shootouts, and targeted assassinations in what became known as the Quebec Biker War, a conflict that claimed over 160 lives and wounded countless others. Despite the bloodshed happening under his watch, Stadnik maintained a remarkable ability to avoid direct links to violence. While his soldiers carried out murders and bombings, he remained insulated, using encrypted communications and tight-knit circles of trusted associates. This careful approach kept him free while other leaders faced prison time. Stadnik's influence spread beyond Canada. He established connections with chapters across Europe and particularly in the UK, where British bikers studied and adopted his organizational methods. His blueprint for expansion, combining strategic violence with business acumen, became the template for how modern outlaw motorcycle clubs grow their territory and influence. The empire Stadnik built eventually attracted serious attention from law enforcement, setting the stage for ambitious young leaders like Vidal Rashad Reed to rise through the ranks with new approaches to the old biker code. Vidal Rashad Reed. Vidal Rashad Reed wasn't born into the spotlight. Growing up in North Carolina's patchwork landscape of rural communities and growing cities, the young man who would eventually face murder charges started out like many others. Those who knew Reed in his earlier years described someone with natural charisma and street smarts that helped him navigate the complex social networks of Raleigh's East Side. By his early 20s, Reed had developed a reputation as someone who could move between different social circles with ease. Unlike the older generation of bikers who lived and breathed motorcycle culture from their teen years, Reed came to the scene later, drawn not just by the bikes, but by the connections and opportunities they represented. North Carolina has long been home to both legitimate motorcycle enthusiasts and clubs with darker reputations. The state's extensive highways and rural backroads make it perfect for riding, while its position along major East Coast trafficking routes has historically attracted organized groups with interests beyond just motorcycles. Reed, now 29, found his niche somewhere in this grey area. He wasn't your stereotypical biker. He was younger, more adaptable, and understood how the game was changing. While traditional clubs operated on old-school principles of loyalty and territory, Reed recognized that modern criminal enterprises needed to evolve. As law enforcement cracked down on obvious criminal activity, Reed reportedly helped modernize operations within his circle. He wasn't the loudest or most visibly dangerous. Those who knew him say he preferred to stay just under the radar, making connections and solving problems rather than creating them. The world Reed operated in was changing fast. The old image of motorcycle clubs, exclusively white, middle-aged men on American-made bikes, had given way to a more diverse reality. Younger members like Reed represented a new generation that blended traditional biker culture with street life and modern business sense. In Raleigh's evolving urban landscape, different groups often crossed paths, sometimes peacefully and sometimes not. Reed understood the power of alliances in these spaces. He wasn't the biggest or most intimidating figure, but associates describe someone who knew how to talk, when to listen, and when to make strategic moves. Whatever path Reed had been on took a dramatic turn on January 1st, 2025. What appeared at first to be a tragic motorcycle accident on Bayberry Lane in Raleigh would later be revealed as something far more sinister. Jonas Barrett Padilla, 37, was thrown from his motorcycle and later died from his injuries. Within days, police had reclassified the incident as a homicide. The investigation moved quickly. By the time police announced arrests, they had 5 suspects in custody, Reed among them, alongside Anthony Chver, Tyler Gryom, Germaine Starks, and David Stevens. The charges were serious: murder, robbery with a dangerous weapon, and conspiracy to commit robbery with a dangerous weapon. Law enforcement hasn't publicly revealed all details about what happened that evening, but court documents suggest a planned attack rather than a random act of violence. The fact that authorities separated some defendants during court appearances to prevent them from communicating and further conspiring hints at concerns about the group's coordination. People familiar with North Carolina's biker world weren't entirely surprised by the violence. Tensions between different clubs have simmered beneath the surface for years, occasionally boiling over into public view. While police haven't officially confirmed gang connections, local sources suggest Padilla had ties to one motorcycle group, while some of the arrested men were affiliated with rivals. These club rivalries aren't just about motorcycles, they're about territory, respect, and business interests. In the modern era, these conflicts can involve everything from drug distribution to legitimate businesses used for money laundering. Whatever the specific trigger, the result was the same: a man dead, a family shattered, and 5 suspects facing potential death penalty charges. When Reed appeared in court, the extra security presence spoke volumes about how authorities viewed the case and its defendants. 5 additional deputies stood watch, an unusual step that signaled the seriousness of both the charges and the perceived risk. For Reed, the promising street operator who had navigated Raleigh's complex social landscape, the future now holds only 2 possibilities: life behind bars or the death penalty. Chief Estella Patterson's words hung in the air: dangerous criminals who terrorize and harm our communities with callous and relentless violence. As the case moves forward, the full story of what happened that New Year's Day, and Reed's exact role in it, remains to be determined in court. But for now, the rapid fall from street operator to murder suspect marks the latest chapter in a life that took the wrong turns. Germaine Starks. At 41, Germaine Starks was the oldest among the 5 men charged in the murder of Jonas Barrett Padilla. On the streets of Raleigh, they called him the Hammer, not just for his imposing 6 feet 2 inches frame and powerful build, but for how he handled problems. In the world of North Carolina's motorcycle clubs, Starks had built a reputation as someone who didn't say much, but whose presence alone could settle disputes. Unlike his younger co-defendants, Starks represented the old guard of biker culture, He wasn't interested in new technology or modern methods. He believed in the traditional ways. People who knew him described a man who lived by a strict code, loyalty to his brothers, respect for the old ways, and swift consequences for anyone who crossed the line. Starks didn't start out in the biker world. His journey began in the military, where he served for nearly a decade before receiving an other-than-honorable discharge following a series of disciplinary issues. Those who served with him remembered a soldier with natural leadership abilities and tactical skills, but also someone with a dangerous temper when pushed too far. After leaving the service, Starks struggled to find his place in civilian life. The structured environment of motorcycle clubs provided something he'd been missing: brotherhood, purpose, and clear rules. By his mid-30s, he had established himself in Raleigh's biker community as someone who handled security and enforced discipline within his circle. What made him particularly effective wasn't just his size or strength, it was his calculated approach. Unlike younger hotheads who rushed into conflicts, Starks planned carefully. He understood intimidation was often more effective than actual violence. In North Carolina's competitive motorcycle club scene, this reputation made him both respected and feared. The tension between traditional biker culture and newer approaches played out within Raleigh's motorcycle clubs. Investigators believe this clash of old and new may have contributed to the violent confrontation that claimed Padilla's life on New Year's Day. Jonas Barrett Padilla, the 37-year-old victim, reportedly had connections to the Pagans Motorcycle Club. Meanwhile, Starks and his co-defendants, including 29-year-old Vidal represented a different faction. For years, these groups had maintained an uneasy coexistence in North Carolina, but something changed in late 2024. Law enforcement sources suggest that territorial disputes had been brewing for months. While younger members like Reed might have favored modern approaches to these conflicts, Starks reportedly pushed for more direct action. His old-school mentality, that respect had to be earned through strength and fear, clashed with newer members' preference for less visible methods of control. What exactly happened on January 1, 2025, remains partially shrouded in investigative secrecy. What's known is that at approximately 7:10 p.m., police responded to what appeared to be a motorcycle accident on Bayberry Lane. They found Padilla thrown from his bike with serious injuries that would later prove fatal. By January 4th, investigators had determined this was no accident. Evidence suggested Padilla had been deliberately targeted in what police now classify as a robbery and murder. Within days, 5 arrests followed, including Starks, who police believe played a significant role in planning and executing the attack. Court documents hint that the confrontation may have been carefully orchestrated. Prosecutors allege that Starks' military background proved valuable in coordinating the group's movements that evening. The heightened security during court proceedings, with 5 extra deputies present, speaks to how seriously authorities view these defendants and the potential for ongoing conflicts. What separates Starks from typical criminals is his adherence to what insiders call the code. In traditional motorcycle club culture, this unwritten set of rules governs everything from loyalty to handling conflicts. Those familiar with Starks say he lived by these principles with almost religious devotion. This code likely explains the extra security measures taken during court appearances. Authorities separated some defendants to prevent them from communicating and further conspiring, suggesting concerns about their continued coordination even behind bars. For someone like Starks, cooperation with authorities would be unthinkable. The brotherhood comes first. As Starks now faces the possibility of life imprisonment or even the death penalty, his story represents the darker side of motorcycle club culture that continues to exist despite law enforcement crackdowns. For decades, territorial disputes and codes of honor have fueled cycles of violence across America's biker world. Raleigh Police Chief Estella Patterson's statement about removing dangerous criminals who terrorize and harm our communities with callous and relentless violence speaks directly to the threat authorities believe men like Starks pose to public safety. For the family of Jonas Barrett Padilla, particularly his wife and son, the old codes and club rivalries provided no comfort, only heartbreak. As one friend put it, Padilla wasn't just a news story, he was my best friend. The collision between old-school biker mentality and an innocent life has left permanent scars on a community, with Martinus Germaine Starks now facing judgment for his role in a tragedy that never should have happened. Tyler Scott Grysom. At just 29 years old, Tyler Scott Grysom wasn't what most people picture when they think of dangerous criminals. Friends described him as smart, calculated, and always thinking 3 steps ahead. Unlike some of his co-defendants in the murder of Jonas Barrett Padilla, Grysom wasn't primarily known for physical intimidation. His power came from his mind, his ability to plan, organize, and stay cool under pressure. Growing up in North Carolina's Triangle region, Grysom had a knack for moving between different social circles. He could blend in anywhere, from high-end motorcycle dealerships to rough biker bars. This chameleon-like quality made him particularly valuable in Raleigh's motorcycle club scene, where he reportedly served as something of a strategist for his group. What made Grysom different from stereotypical biker gang members was his carefully crafted public image. While many of his associates embraced the outlaw appearance, Grysom maintained a more mainstream look that helped him navigate both the biker world and legitimate society. By day, people who knew him said he worked at a motorcycle shop where customers found him knowledgeable and professional. His mechanical skills were genuinely impressive, and he could discuss the intricacies of custom bikes with enthusiasm that didn't seem fake. This legitimate connection to the motorcycle world provided both cover for other activities and genuine passion. Several acquaintances expressed shock when his name appeared in connection with Padilla's murder. The Grysom they knew seemed too calculated to get involved in something so brazen. But investigators believe this public persona masked a much darker side, one willing to participate in planned violence when it served his group's interests. Law enforcement sources familiar with motorcycle clubs in North Carolina suggest Grysom played a financial role within his circle, while older members like 41-year-old Martinus Starks may have handled enforcement, and younger members like Vidal brought street connections. Grysom reportedly managed resources and planned operations. This organizational role might explain why authorities took special precautions during court proceedings. When Grysom made his first appearance before a judge, he was separated from some co-defendants. Court officials cited security risks and concerns about defendants further conspiring as reasons for keeping them apart. These unusual steps suggest investigators view Grysom as someone with significant influence over the group. People familiar with motorcycle club operations note that financially minded members like Grysom are often more dangerous than the obvious tough guys. Their ability to manage money, plan complex operations, and maintain connections across different worlds makes them particularly valuable to criminal organizations, and especially concerning to law enforcement. As pieces of the investigation have become public, Grysom's alleged role in Jonas Padilla's death appears consistent with his reputation as a planner. The killing wasn't a random act of violence, but what prosecutors describe as a coordinated attack disguised as a motorcycle accident. On January 1, 2025 at 7:10 p.m., what initially appeared to be a tragic motorcycle crash on Bayberry Lane turned out to be something much more sinister. Padilla, thrown from his motorcycle with serious injuries, later died at the hospital. By January 4th, investigators had reclassified the case as a homicide. Court documents suggest the 5 defendants, Grysom, Starks, Chver, and Stevens, planned the attack as a robbery that turned deadly. The heightened security presence during court appearances, 5 extra deputies in the courtroom, speaks to how seriously authorities view these suspects and their potential danger. While officials haven't publicly confirmed all details, sources familiar with North Carolina's motorcycle club scene suggest the killing stemmed from ongoing tensions between rival groups. Padilla reportedly had connections to one club, while Grysom and his co-defendants were affiliated with another. These motorcycle club conflicts often revolve around territory, respect, and business interests. Grysom's alleged participation highlights how even members who maintain more respectable appearances can become involved in the worst aspects of club violence when rivalries escalate. For Grysom, the consequences couldn't be higher. Along with his co-defendants, he faces charges of murder, robbery with a dangerous weapon, and conspiracy to commit robbery with a dangerous weapon, charges that could potentially bring the death penalty or life imprisonment. The case has devastated Padilla's family. His wife and son now face life without him, and his mother-in-law described the murder as a heartbreaking tragedy. A friend emphasized that Padilla wasn't just a news story, he was my best friend. As the case moves toward trial, the full depth of Grysom's involvement will likely become clearer. But whatever role he played in the events of New Year's Day, the clean-cut strategist now finds himself facing the same potential fate as his more visibly dangerous associates: a lifetime behind bars or possibly death row for a crime that shattered a family and shocked a community. Anthony Edward Chver. Anthony Edward Chver seemed like the last person anyone would expect to face murder charges. At 33, the oldest except for Martinez Starks among the 5 defendants, Chver had built a reputation in Raleigh as someone who understood both sides of the law. With his neat appearance, articulate speech, and seeming respect for authority, many who knew him were shocked when his name appeared in connection with the death of Jonas Barrett Padilla. Unlike his co-defendants, Chver hadn't grown up in the biker world. His path to involvement with motorcycle clubs came through a more unexpected route: former military and security work that eventually connected him with groups operating in the shadows of North Carolina's motorcycle community. The irony of Chver's situation wasn't lost on those who knew his history. After serving 4 years in the military, Chver had worked in private security and even briefly considered a career in law enforcement. Former colleagues described someone who understood police tactics, security systems, and the legal system from the inside. This background made him particularly valuable to motorcycle clubs with criminal connections. While most members attracted police attention with obvious displays of outlaw culture, Chver knew how to blend in. He could spot undercover officers, recognize surveillance operations, and advise on avoiding legal pitfalls. These skills earned him respect in circles where such knowledge was highly valued. People familiar with motorcycle clubs in North Carolina suggested Chver played an advisory role rather than being a full patch-wearing member. His knowledge of law enforcement techniques reportedly helped certain groups stay one step ahead of police. Until the events of New Year's Day 2025 changed everything. By late 2024, Chver had established himself as something of a security consultant within Raleigh's biker underground. Sources close to the investigation believe he used his knowledge of police tactics to help plan various criminal activities, ensuring they remained difficult to detect or prosecute. This expertise allegedly extended to the planning of what would become a fatal confrontation with Jonas Padilla. Investigators suspect Chver advised on how to make a murder appear like an accident, knowledge that could only come from someone familiar with how police investigate suspicious deaths. The tragedy unfolded on January 1, 2025, when what initially appeared to be a motorcycle accident on Bayberry Lane turned out to be something far more sinister. Padilla was thrown from his bike and suffered fatal injuries. Police quickly determined the accident had been staged, and by January 4th, they had reclassified the case as a homicide. What makes Chver's case particularly disturbing to law enforcement is how he allegedly used inside knowledge against the very system he once respected. Prosecutors believe his understanding of police methods helped the group plan their crime and initially disguise its true nature. This betrayal of his former principles might explain the heightened security during court appearances. When the 5 defendants faced a judge, extra deputies stood watch, an unusual step that signaled how seriously authorities viewed these men and the potential ongoing threat they represented. For investigators, Chver represents a particularly troubling type of criminal, someone who understands the system well enough to exploit its weaknesses. His alleged role in the murder plot showed how knowledge meant to protect communities could be twisted to serve darker purposes. Court documents suggest the killing stemmed from ongoing tensions between rival motorcycle groups in the Raleigh area. Padilla reportedly had connections to one club, while Chver and his co-defendants were linked to another. These club rivalries, once limited to bar fights and territory disputes, had escalated to deadly violence. Chver's position between the legitimate security world and outlaw biker culture allegedly made him useful in this conflict. He could move between different social circles, gathering information and planning operations without attracting the same attention as more obvious club members. For Chver, the consequences of his alleged actions couldn't be more severe. Along with Vidal Reed, Tyler Grysom, Martinus Starks, and David Stevens, he faces charges that could bring the death penalty or life imprisonment without parole. Raleigh Police Chief Estella Patterson's words about removing dangerous criminals who terrorize and harm our communities now apply to a man who once might have stood on the side of law and order. His fall from potential protector to alleged murderer represents one of the most disturbing aspects of this tragic case. As the legal process moves forward, the full extent of Chver's involvement will likely become clearer. But the damage already done can't be undone. A family mourns a husband and father, and a community grapples with violence that shattered the peace of a New Year's evening in Raleigh. David William Stevens.
He's also been charged with the first-degree murder of Jonas Padilla. In that case, you could receive the death penalty or life in prison.
The other two suspects, 24-year-old David Stevens and 29-year-old Tyler Grysom, appeared in court this morning. Investigators tell us the separate hearings are to prevent the men from conspiring or communicating in any way.
At just 24 years old, David William Stevens was the youngest of the 5 men charged in Jonas Barrett Padilla's murder. While his older co-defendants brought established connections and years of experience to their alleged crime, Stevens represented something different: youth, impressionability, and a desperate desire to prove himself in a world where respect often came through violence. Friends who knew Stevens described someone caught between worlds, not fully embraced by the motorcycle club scene, but eager to earn his place. Unlike the older defendants with established reputations, Stevens was still trying to make his mark, making him potentially more unpredictable and dangerous. Growing up in Raleigh's outskirts, Stevens had bounced between different social groups throughout his teens and early 20s. Former classmates remembered him as someone always on the edges, watching the popular kids and tough crowds with equal measures of resentment and admiration. His connection to motorcycle culture began through basic mechanics. With natural talent for engines but limited formal education, Stevens found work at local bike shops, where his technical skills earned respect that eluded him in other parts of life. This entry point eventually connected him with more established figures in Raleigh's motorcycle community. By late 2024, Stevens had reportedly begun spending time with older, more established members like Martinus Starks and Anthony Chver. Sources familiar with local motorcycle clubs suggest he was in a prospect phase, not yet fully accepted, but eager to prove his loyalty and worth. When the plan to target Jonas Padilla came together, investigators believe Stevens' eagerness to prove himself made him a willing participant. The youngest and least established member of the group had the most to gain by demonstrating his commitment through whatever action was required. The attack on January 1st, that initially appeared to be a motorcycle accident, revealed itself as something far more sinister. Padilla was thrown from his motorcycle on Baybury Lane and later died from his injuries. Within days, police had determined it was murder, and 5 arrests followed, including Stevens. What made Stevens particularly concerning to authorities became evident during court proceedings. When he and Tyler Grysom appeared before a judge separately from the other 3 defendants, investigators cited a possible security risk and concerns about further conspiracy as reasons for the separation. This unusual step suggests investigators viewed Stevens as unpredictable, perhaps more willing to take desperate actions or more vulnerable to influence from others. As the youngest defendant with potentially the most to prove, his behavior presented unique challenges for court security. For Stevens, the consequences of his alleged quest for belonging couldn't be more severe. Along with his co-defendants, he faces murder charges that could bring life imprisonment or the death penalty, a devastatingly high price for whatever acceptance he sought from his older associates. Raleigh Police Chief Estella Patterson's statement about removing dangerous criminals from the streets now applies to a young man whose full story is still unfolding. As the youngest defendant, Stevens represents a particular tragedy, someone whose search for identity and respect allegedly led him down a path ending in murder charges before his 25th birthday. While Padilla's family mourns their devastating loss, a husband and father gone forever, 5 men, including Stevens, await their next court date. Facing the ultimate consequences for what police describe as a planned attack that brought needless death to Raleigh's streets, on the first day of 2025.